All right, we're just gonna get Pierre getting in here.
All right, Pierre.
All right. Hey, how's it going today?
Good, good. How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Yeah, and Happy New
It's good to
Year
see you.
to, yeah, likewise. Yeah, and Happy New Year to people watching right now or will be watching later.
Yeah, Happy New
Um,
Year, everyone.
so yeah, I guess goals. We wanted to talk about goals, but before we get started, I wanted to maybe do a quick follow up on from our last live on the whole
Yeah.
aspect of forgiveness. And I don't know if you wanted to share anything. I could share some of the stuff I focused on, and then we can kind of switch gears from there.
Yeah, man, go for it. I'm gonna adjust the temperature in this room for just a sec, so
Okay,
have at
okay.
it. I can still hear you
Sounds
well.
all right, sounds good. Yeah, so I think for me personally, around the whole aspect of self-forgiveness, there was a few things that I really focused on. One of them was really giving myself permission every day to start new, and I've touched on that. But considering every day a new opportunity, and not really getting too stuck on what happened the day prior, in terms of ruminating and just getting stuck in that past. So that was the biggest thing, and just the constant reminder that every day I'm doing my best, and that's all I can focus on.
I love that. I love that. I think I share some similarities there, especially around loosening the expectations that I might have for myself around perfectionism. And so the the allowing myself a little bit of grace each day to sort of revisit what my intentions are and recognize that um, maybe yesterday didn't look exactly like I'd intended, and that's okay too. Yeah,
Hmm.
that I think was particularly true for me of writing over the last few weeks since we met. And I
Yeah.
found too that giving myself a little bit of grace also allowed for making more progress in terms of writing, which is sort of maybe counterintuitive that somehow reducing the sense of perfectionism and lack of forgiveness might actually allow you to get closer to your end goal.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it makes
Yeah,
sense to me. And it kind of fits, I think, well into what we want to talk about today.
yeah,
So switching gears, and really talking about goals, I wanted to touch on a few things today. So first of all, I mean, there's this tendency to have New Year's resolutions. So what does that mean in terms of in comparison to goals? And one of the things I wanted to expand on, do we set goals for the sake of setting goals, or are we setting goals in alignment with our values?
mhm.
And then also understanding the focus on the process versus the outcome. So that's another thing I wanted to talk about. And finally, touch on where we encounter barriers or blockers in terms of reaching our goals, or even achieving them. So I don't
I
know
like that.
if that cool.
Yeah, that
So
fits.
awesome. Yeah. So let's talk about. And I've mentioned this. I really struggle with the whole notion of New Year's resolutions. I think what I appreciate about the new year is it's mentally it is a fresh start. However, I always laugh when I go to the gym. The month of January is always busy, and then you kind of see that drop off. So I guess that kind of feeds into what I wanted to touch on. Are we setting goals because either we want to fit in? It's because everyone's doing it. Are we setting goals because we feel like we have to? Versus the whole aspect of, doing what we feel is in alignment with ourselves. So yeah, just want to get your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I think I experienced the same thing. I now don't go to a gym, and my gym is at home in essence, so that sort of eliminates that. But I think I also see this sort of push at the new year to revisit, to take stock of life, and to really re-examine what's working and perhaps what's not, what I might want more. And there's something really compelling about a fresh start. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think we could go down the route of sort of poo-pooing New Year's resolutions, and there's a lot of reason to rethink that tradition. My take is that only doing that once a year and not revisiting, re-examining what the priorities and values are more regularly is sort of a setup that ultimately means you're sprinting and then running out of steam, not getting into the habit of revisiting what is important to you and what is not. And
Mm-hmm.
also there may be a tendency to sort of focus on the usual New Year's resolutions without expanding to consider what is actually important to you based on your own values. And so based on your own values, you might not feel very strongly compelled to make a big resolution around finance or around physical fitness. But
Mm-hmm.
you might be more inclined to make resolutions around connection or love or strength in some way. And I think you sort of box yourself in when you look at it just in terms of New Year's resolutions, which tend to be pretty outcomes focused. They
Mm-hmm.
tend to be sort of task and outcomes focused without necessarily considering what's most important to one's values. And so I think that tends to shortchange people. Also, my experience with New Year's resolutions is I create them with sort of the expectation that I have to reach some end point. There's not really a style to revisit whether the whole point of it even makes sense for me in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
uh, I suppose for me, I never really sort of shared my New Year's resolution, so it didn't to the point that was just mentioned um, by A. Macleo, they seem to be centered around fitting in versus what we want to experience. Yeah, I think often they tend to be really stereotypic, especially if they're shared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, whether your goals are around fitness, finance, connection, one of the things I was thinking about is we probably want to get down to below the surface, right? And understand, okay, well, where is that desire coming from? Is that a desire that we even, does that even make sense? And that's where I wanted to focus on the alignment within ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So is connection with people something that you desire because, you want to build stronger relationships with your family members or your friends? Is the finance goal just for status, or is there a deeper desire, right? And same with fitness. Is it because it's because do you want to look good for other people, or is it something that you internalize? So I think when you're doing that, or going through that process of even just setting goals, understand what it is within you intrinsically that needs to be fulfilled, and doing that deeper work. So for me, it's almost like reverse engineering the goal, right? Trying to understand, okay, what is it that I need to, like internally, whether it's my own personal development or my own healing, uh, what needs to take place, and how can I get there? And that's where, for me, I almost identify that goal by working backwards. So I don't
Hmm.
know your thoughts on that, Pierre.
Yeah, my thoughts are very in line with yours. I mean, it gets me thinking about the way in which many guys might come to us,
Mm-hmm.
specifically looking to change one or two or maybe many aspects of their lives. In a lot of ways, it's less important to identify how do you get there, but what's the significance of actually making that change? If you reach that endpoint by the end of the year or by the end of 6 months, what changes in your life?
Mm-hmm.
What do you have more of? What do you have less of, if that is important? What is the ultimate significance and importance of the change that you're looking to make? Because there may be a desired outcome without really thinking through what actually changes. So there may be an expectation of wanting to have, you know, great abs. And sure, that's not a bad outcome. It's
Yeah.
not, abs aren't bad. And also, if the expectation is that um, that once you have a set of abs, you're gonna feel happier, have a partner or a mate, or feel closer to other people, um, well, the two may not actually be aligned. And so you may be missing the opportunity to create what it is that you are actually looking for, separate
Mm-hmm.
from the goal that you set.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a lot of ways, um, we're shortchanging ourselves by thinking of just the outcome without thinking about and really reasoning through the values that underlie those outcomes, and also some of the stories we tell ourselves about the outcomes. That if I have, I don't know, a certain amount of money in the bank, that things will change for me in a dramatic way. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what does that change? And are you expecting yourself? Are you being owned by the outcome rather than um, rather than serving the underlying value that you're looking to build? And in
Mm-hmm.
many cases, the answer is yes. And I think that that becomes a barrier to actually to undertaking and completing a task if your resolutions or your goals are very task or outcomes oriented. We can become sort of beholden to the goal and then even feel resentment around it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not really a recipe for follow through.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And I experienced that in the past where I was just setting goals to achieve, and every time I achieved a certain goal, I still felt empty. So I wasn't really identifying the goals in terms of, again, going back to in terms of alignment with who I was, who I wanted to be as an individual, uh, and in alignment with my own values, right?
Yeah.
So until I didn't really identify my purpose of what I wanted to do in this life, I wasn't really able to articulate the goals that aligned with that. And that feeds in kind of everything you touched on, Pierre, in terms of outcomes versus the process. And we find ourselves, and I think most people are guilty of it, is we become attached to the outcome, right? And
Yeah.
then we don't get that desired outcome. We get discouraged. We feel resentful, like you said. We feel bitter, rather than really looking at the process as a whole, because the process itself could be a success, right? Like if I don't achieve
Yeah.
a certain goal, great, the outcome wasn't what I wanted, but maybe I took 10 lessons from that whole process that I can apply and know better for next time. So that's what I wanted to touch on in terms of when people are either setting goals, is are they completely attached to the outcome, or are they in it for the process? And I mean, there's that cliche around trust the process, right? So just wanted to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. 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 I think the incremental steps and the strategies and tactics that are used in the process of actualizing any outcome is really where the opportunity for growth and consistency and discipline come about. Because you could be very successful in the actions, the individual actions, and not meet your final outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And um, And then ultimately, do you celebrate your actions? Um, do you find yourself missing the mark, having not reached the outcome that you set?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that outcome may be very arbitrary. In some cases, the outcomes aren't arbitrary, but in many cases, they are.
Mm-hmm.
And the process itself is actually where the consistency and the capacity to make important changes in one's life come about. I
Yeah.
could work out every day, still not have six-pack abs. There might be a lot of reasons for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there might be a lot
Yeah.
of reasons for hustling or doing the work that we do every day around our careers. Um, but perhaps we don't end up getting the promotion or the certain amount in our bank accounts. Do we then chide ourselves for not having achieved that? I think ultimately, if we're strictly outcomes based, we're setting ourselves up for this binary yes or no, I succeeded or I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you also succeeded in getting the outcome in different ways. You might have um, not worked as hard as you could, but ultimately scored the outcome. Is that outcome as important without the actual process of the work each day? Maybe not. And so
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's some value for markers. I think especially for guys, a lot of us like to have some goal to which we're working, and that's beautiful. But it's got to sort of be, we've got to be able to maintain control over it rather than it controlling us. And I do often think that in my past, this is where I've gone wrong
Mm-hmm.
with setting with setting New Year's resolutions,
Mm-hmm.
setting goals in
Mm-hmm.
general.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think for me, something that jumped out while you were mentioning the whole outcomes versus the process. So one of the things I encourage people, and I try to implement myself, is having setting some time aside to reflect, right?
Mhm.
So even if you didn't achieve the outcome you wanted, understand, okay, well, what did you learn along the way, which I touched on earlier. And to your point, also finding those opportunities to pivot, because often when we gather that information, we realize that maybe going to this destination was not where I wanted to go. So then you can have that opportunity pivot, but that really comes when you reflect. I think it's being open to whatever's coming at you, right? So even if you're getting information about yourself, and being humble in the sense that recognizing that you are flawed and you may learn new information that you can apply. So that's where I think the process becomes important, because it's not like getting from point A to point B just for the sake of it. Now it's a whole learning experience, right?
Mhm.
And I don't think you can put value on that, but that's how I look at it. And then having um, time set aside along the way to reflect and look back and understand, okay, well, where am I headed? Do I need to course correct? What am I learning? How can I improve along the
Mhm.
way? So
How do
yeah.
you set that up usually?
So I do spend quite a bit of time reflecting, and I
Yeah.
mean, I could either set it aside, or it's just quite often, if I'm out for a walk, it's just thoughts brewing in my head, and then I'll take notes, or I find journaling really helps with that too. For me,
Yeah.
it's more of a visual process, and kind of like visualizing, again along the way. Okay, is this the path I want to be on, and do I need to make changes here? So I think there's different ways of doing it. And certain ways may work for some people, and others may not. But
Mhm.
that's how I look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I find myself reflecting on often daily during walks. I think that's become kind
Hmm.
of it's become kind of a habit and a routine for me. But I think that I tend less to journal, and it might be to my detriment. And so it gets me wondering about how actually taking note of the challenges that I might have faced in the process of trying to initiate a task or carry it out might actually help me to move forward, to pivot in ways that feel important, and also to course correct. The pivoting part
Mm-hmm.
feels, I mean, the pivoting part feels the most important, perhaps the most mature experience of it, because maybe um, what I see often is sort of taking a very sort of classical approach, classical educational or training approach. And I see this a lot, especially when I work with physicians. And when I do, and I appreciate this, the experience and the sort of the historical experience of physician training, that at no point is anything short of perfection kind of seen as the goal. And
Mm-hmm.
granted, you can succeed plenty without necessarily having to get everything right or do everything perfectly. Um, it's rare that we then get to course correct based on our own choices. It's
Mm-hmm.
usually based on some external marker. And so if we set these external markers, these goals that we have, um, to as very strict, then when we reach some point midway through or even just a month in, we're not able to say, well, we're not able to revisit the goal itself. Is the
Mm-hmm.
goal actually the same this month as it was when I first created this goal, when I first created this outcome that I really want to achieve? And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I don't think this is certainly not limited to physicians. It's the way in which we grew up, the way in which all of us have experienced education as kids and adolescents and adults. That there's a certain pathway, and we're working towards that pathway with the expectation that once we reach the end of that pathway, we're set. Well,
Mm-hmm.
this is not really that way. Um, Actually, sort of ex um, adjusting and course correcting, pivoting, changing our path is really within our own control. And so you might hire a personal trainer to keep you motivated or to keep you um, active in the accomplishment. But ultimately, it's really up to you to define what it is that you want for
Mm-hmm.
yourself. And
Absolutely.
I think that that is in many ways an unfamiliar concept. Um, and so the rigidity of these goals that we might set can sometimes then um, blow up in our faces. And so I love the idea of, and journaling is huge because it allows for seeing progress. But I love the
Mm-hmm.
idea of then asking yourself, where am I going to course correct? How am I going to adjust? Is the goal still the same goal?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you mentioned one thing that I'm hoping you can maybe expand on a little bit. You said the the notion of course correcting is not often based on our internal choices. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, I think if we hold the outcome as somehow really strict ideal, then we're sort of beholden to the that outcome and not able to make individual internally based course corrections. We're not able to say, well, maybe I don't want to do what it takes to get X. Maybe it actually is a detriment to other parts of my life, like my family or my
Mm-hmm.
career. Um, and so ultimately, if we're really strict, and I find this is true for me certainly, but also the men with whom I work, if we're really strict with um, staying true to the outcome at all costs, then ultimately we're not able to make conscious choices to pivot if that though the outcome doesn't serve us somehow. I see
Right.
this a lot, I think, and true in some cases with people who really are looking to do something really dramatic, like I'll sort of use this. Um, I'll use this as sort of the marathon metaphor that all they
Right.
really like you really put your all into running a marathon. That could be literal, but I'm thinking it more terms of in terms of a figurative sense. That
Mm.
might be looking a certain way, physical fitness, writing a book, learning a language. You can get so immersed in it that it comes at the detriment of perhaps your own other priorities in your life or your own safety, security, comfort, peace of mind. And
Mm-hmm.
so there does have to be an element of recognizing what is serving you and what might not be, and then course correcting based on your own individual choices. And I think that that is often very rooted in personal values. And so
Mm-hmm.
that goes back to your point around the importance of clarifying the values that you want to really honor. And I think for me, that's been the biggest way that resolutions have changed for me. Um, a new year is not necessarily a time to sort of upend everything that I've been doing before, but it's certainly there's something really compelling to a new slate, perhaps a blank slate, even if it's not entirely.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find myself identifying certain values that I really want to embrace or embody um, in the month or the 6 months or the year ahead. And I think about the ways in which I just engage in my everyday life. How can I infuse my actions every day with the values that feel really important? And for me this year, um, those values feel really strongly rooted in presence and connection and strength
Mm-hmm.
and action um, and simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, sure, I'm not likely to do anything dramatically different this year than I did last year in terms of the actual actions. I'm still writing, still working out, still spending time with family, still sort of building a practice. And also, I would love to be able to just infuse more of the values that feel important to me into those simple actions. It ultimately means, in very much the same ways that I find myself encouraging the men with whom I work, it means very much that I'm doing less and doing it better, that I'm
Mm-hmm.
more
Mm-hmm.
present, more capable, more strong in my work.
For sure,
Yeah.
for sure. And what Dave said here resonates for me too. Like honoring the days where you may not be at your best, right? So that's kind of one of
Yeah.
my focus areas for the year is to just take it easy on myself.
Yeah.
And I think having that permission to maybe not perform at 100% certain days, but that's okay, because then I think it allows me to build on that. One of the last things I wanted to touch on before we move on around what you mentioned, Pierre, that whole notion of course correction or pivoting. I think the personally, I feel the reason why a lot of people struggle with that is you let your ego get in the way, right?
Hmm.
So anytime you have to make that choice to pivot or course correct, you're having to accept that, okay, maybe I made the wrong choice, or maybe, I aimed at the wrong thing and now I need to shift focus. And I think ego is a huge thing in that sense, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think just being aware of that, trying to understand where is that resistance coming from? Is it your ego? And
Mm.
maybe trying to work through that, right? So
Mm.
being aware of that resistance. So yeah, so the last piece I wanted to touch on is um, the blockers and the barriers to achieving our goals or even striving towards them. And in my view, and this is something I've shared with you, Pierre, as well offline, but I think if we personally, I believe, and even the work I want to do or I try to do with men is understanding your past, right? If you haven't healed your past, or you're not working towards healing your past, I believe you're going to constantly come up against blockers or barriers to achieving whatever it is you want to achieve. And I think it's powerful to be able to heal those things from the past that keep coming up, the same patterns or the behaviors before. And I think that by doing so, it almost streamlines your ability to achieve the goals you're setting for yourself. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, I mean, I think that is in a lot of ways that the patterns that we've had historically around accomplishment, achievement, and goal setting in the way in which we see our loved ones, our families, people around us engaging certain goals or engaging certain actions plays a big role in how we show up and how the relationships that we build with self-care and personal development. And so I think that I don't think that there are certainly universal blockers, the sort of the discomfort of unfamiliarity for many of us, the fear of what happens if I change a certain way that I am, having to embrace the challenge of the actual work, idealizing the outcome without really seeing what the change itself entails. All of those things are natural, I think, universal blockers. But I agree with you. I think many of us have more deeply seated or deeply rooted patterns of seeing ourselves based on how we respond or how we succeed or how we achieve, and understanding what it actually means to accomplish something, what it might mean to falter. Exploring that becomes really helpful. I think really helpful to appreciating how we get through those blockers, maybe even embracing the blockers, things that we might see getting in the way of the outcome. Maybe they're actually things that we want to embrace.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the patterns are important. Like in my own personal experience, achievements was like I set new achievements or goals around achieving something consistently. And as I mentioned earlier, I would achieve something and then I would feel empty. And until I didn't really recognize that pattern and do the work to understand, okay, where was that desire coming from? And it was like, okay, it was this validation I was seeking as a child from my parents, and it carried forward into my life. And it was just that constant, okay, I need to be doing this to be validated, to feel good enough. Until I didn't recognize that and heal that, I didn't get better at setting goals. And then understanding, okay, well, what does this mean? How does that bring value into my life? How does that allow me to live in alignment with who I'm trying to become? So I think, the aspect of blockers for me is huge. And I think that's something I like to identify or work with anyone that wants to work with me in that sense, right? So helping them through that and navigating that, because I feel like once you've kind of done that work around your blockers, then you should, like, I don't need to help anyone set goals. They should be able to do it themselves, and look at it as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, it's akin to really thinking about the work that we do as helping men to really guide themselves moving forward. now and moving forward. In many ways, the sense of being accountable to another person, whether that's a coach or a therapist or someone who's guiding you,
Mm-hmm.
it's helpful. And also making the choices, defining your values, defining how you pivot, responding to your blockers. Those are all really personal things. And so sometimes we may be aware of the blockers that we have. Sometimes it's just helpful to be um, for other people to shine a light on what they might be seeing, or help you to dig through um, making sense of a barrier or a common recurrent sort of experience that gets in the way. And I'm with you, like, and I would set these goals historically thinking something dramatic would change for me, or that I would gain acceptance or love, or just something that felt missing. And then I would reach the goal and I'd still feel the same. Or I'd realize that the goal is just so outlandish, which is usually the case, has usually historically been the case for me, to like
Mm-hmm.
create these ridiculously, um, I don't know, these really ridiculously grandiose goals, thinking if I do this, it's so great, um, you know, I'll feel so good about myself. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I might get there, or I might not get there, and um, and maybe justify this feeling that I have, that I'm not good enough. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's a familiar feeling, and one that I wasn't ready to give up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I might create these like outlandish goals. I remember when um, I don't know why the hell I thought I would want to do this, but um, the last time I went to France, it was a little while back, but I didn't have a lot going on at work. I was still practicing in medicine, and I was a sort of a lull in the academic year. And I remember telling myself that in like the 6 week stretch, I would like learn French and feel very fluent in the like one of the most sort of nuanced, beautifully nuanced languages. Somehow in 6 weeks, I was going to like master it. And it's a beautifully romantic, grandiose goal. But it was one that was really rooted in a desire for some sense of accomplishment or achievement. I didn't master it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it was perfectly fine that I didn't. But I found this like recurrent pattern for me of setting a very strict goal and then berating myself if I don't meet it,
Mm-hmm.
or meeting it with the expectation that I'll feel like anything else in my life doesn't matter, anything else to which I feel doesn't sit right,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of somehow it's okay because I've met this huge goal. And I can tie that back to childhood and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about the patterns of um, what it meant for me as a kid to accomplish, to achieve, that it meant that I was constantly achieving, bringing pride to my parents and my family who struggled in all sorts of social and financial and cultural ways. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so accomplishment to me was tied to love, to being accepted, to bringing joy to an otherwise terrible situation. And so uh, I don't think I recognized that really until I started to do my own um, my own work around personal development, and naturally with the help of therapists, coaches, friends um, who knew me well and weren't afraid to tell me that sometimes I was being a bonehead by belittling myself for not reaching certain goals in certain ways, or setting goals that were just too big. But they're all
Mm-hmm.
patterns of prior engagement. and they may have served us well in the past. And so just like any other parts of us, um, respecting how they served us and respecting and providing compassion to them without necessarily belittling the ways in which we are, um, is important to sort of channeling that energy to help us to change the way that we change our relationship with goal setting, and with personal development. We very much have a say over the love that we receive, the love that we give ourselves, whether or not we meet certain goals. Um, that should, uh, that feels at the heart of the work rather than just making a crazy push to, like a crazy hard push to achieve an outcome.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Pierre. And
Yeah, of course.
that resonates for me because I feel the same. That was kind of my pattern growing up as well. And I think to your point, there is, to a certain extent, it works for us, right?
Yeah.
Just being able to constantly live out that narrative that was fed to us into our adult life, it feels familiar, and it requires a lot of hard work to really question it. But until we don't do it, we're constantly chasing these things and not getting that fulfillment. And then to your point, we're belittling ourselves. We're talking negatively to ourselves. We're basically validating those negative beliefs. So I think there's an aspect of doing that healing so you can navigate these goals and not feel blocked, not have these barriers in terms of achieving them. So yeah. So
Beautiful.
I think, I mean, we've shared a lot here. Is there anything else, Pierre, that you want to touch on in terms of goals and the whole notion around setting ourselves up for success?
Yeah. Uh, I don't. I think we've touched upon a lot of different areas here. I guess one way that might be valuable moving forward for us is um, maybe to revisit this topic as the year progresses, because it's valuable to rethink. It was certainly for me valuable to rethink the values that I want to bring to the table, and I've named a few today. You've named a few of how you want to bring yourself to the year ahead, to the months ahead. It'd be important, I think, to revisit those and see how the natural course of adjusting, course correcting, and pivoting might play out for us individually. I think it might prove to be valuable for other people, certainly prove to be helpful for me. So I'd be inclined to do that if that's something you feel would be helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that that hit home for me as well, that you mentioned earlier, was the whole aspect of checking in with ourselves, right? So,
Yep.
maybe we set the goals at the beginning of the year, but how often do we do, a look back, or how often do
Mhm.
we set time aside to just, we were talking about reflecting and seeing, okay, are we still in line with what we had set for ourselves, and why not, and what have we learned, what can we do differently? There's a lot of power in doing that, so I think that's something maybe we can explore and maybe share in this forum.
Yeah, let's do it, dude.
Okay. I did mention to you offline about the book I'm reading, the Jordan Peterson Beyond Order, and I
Yeah.
also mentioned how he's able to articulate a lot of these things really well, but around the goals and doing stuff around his values, I was going to read a little bit of what he mentions in his book. So basically he says each of us, when fortunate, is compelled forward by something that grips our attention. Now that could be love of a person, a sport, a political, sociological, or economic problem, or a scientific question. So I'll skip some of that, but then he says, you do not choose what interests you, it chooses you. Something manifests itself out of the darkness as compelling, as worth living for. Following that, something moves us further down the road to the next meaningful manifestation. So as it goes, as we continue to seek, develop, grow, and thrive. It is a perilous journey, but it is also the adventure of our lives. So I wanted to kind of leave people with that, and really let that sink in, because for me that was powerful, right? And that's why I believe it's doing that work backwards, understanding who do you want to be as an individual in this world, what's your purpose, and then setting those goals for yourself. So I don't know what your thoughts are, Pierre.
Yeah, well, I think the being versus doing is something that feels like it comes up a lot in the work, but also has come up a lot in my writing, and just in personal reflection, that as I move forward, I might not have a sense of exactly what it is I want to do, set in stone. In many ways, I have a stronger and stronger awareness of who I want to become and who I want to be and how I want to show up. And so it does mean that there are some avenues that are, I do think that leaves us more, and has left me more open to being receptive, being open, being aware to opportunities that might emerge and to actions that might emerge that I never would have thought about. And so in a lot of ways, there is this element of perhaps not having a strict goal in mind or a strict outcome, but opening myself to opportunities that emerge based on an awareness of who I want to be. And that's sort of what I read into that that snippet of what you read from Jordan Peterson's book. Yeah, I like that.
Cool. Well, I think that brings us up on time. So thanks, Pierre, for doing this.
You.
I think this was really valuable. Just through having this conversation, I picked up on a lot of nuggets, and I hope everyone that's watching or will be watching later gets value out of this. But yeah, no, thanks for sharing this space, Pierre. As always, much appreciated. Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you for everyone that joined or, and was engaged and shared their own comments and journeys. Very much appreciated. So, and I guess you and I, and Pierre, we'll figure out what that looks like, these check-ins, but I'm excited to share some of that throughout the year with people.
Ditto. It's good to see you, and thanks for everyone who joined.
Yeah, likewise. All right, take care.
Bye.